I am because we are. Sounds beautiful, right? Like something you'd see on a motivational poster or hear in a TED Talk. It's the core principle of Ubuntu, an ancient African philosophy that's been around for thousands of years. Nelson Mandela lived by it. Desmond Tutu preached it. Even the operating system you might be using right now is named after it. But here's what nobody talks about. This philosophy that sounds so peaceful, so harmonious, so human, might actually be terrifying. Because when you really dig into what I am because we are means, you start to see the cracks. And those cracks? They're big enough to swallow your entire identity. What is Ubuntu? So let's start with what Ubuntu actually is. The word comes from Bantu languages, specifically Zulu and Xhosa, and it roughly translates to humanity or humanness. But the philosophy goes way deeper than that. Ubuntu says your existence, your very sense of self, doesn't come from you as an individual. It comes from your relationship with others. There's a Zulu phrase that captures this perfectly. Umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu. A person is a person through other people. Think about that for a second. You're not a person because you were born. You're not a person because you breathe, think, or exist. You're a person only through your connections to others. Your humanity is given to you by the community, and the community can presumably take it away. In Ubuntu cultures, your identity isn't about your thoughts, your dreams, your individual qualities. It's about how you fit into the collective. Your worth comes from how you serve the group. Your decisions are made with the group in mind. Even your property, in traditional Ubuntu societies, isn't really yours. It belongs to the community, shared among everyone. And on the surface, this sounds incredible. Imagine a world where people genuinely care about each other, where nobody's left behind because we're all connected, where your problems are my problems and we solve them together. Desmond Tutu described Ubuntu beautifully when he said a person with Ubuntu is open and available to others, not threatened by their abilities, because they have self-assurance that comes from knowing they belong in a greater whole. It's a philosophy built on compassion, hospitality, and collective responsibility. In Ubuntu communities, if a traveler showed up at your village, you didn't need to ask if they needed food or water. You just provided it. That was your obligation as someone connected to humanity. So why would I call this dangerous? The beautiful trap. Here's where things get dark. Because Ubuntu doesn't just encourage community, it demands it. And there's a massive difference between those two things. See, in Ubuntu philosophy, the collective isn't just important, it's everything. Your individual needs, secondary. Your personal dreams only matter if they serve the group. Your desire to think differently, that's called disrupting harmony, and harmony is sacred in Ubuntu. One of the main criticisms of Ubuntu is that it views the collective above any individual. And the problem with this is it forces a feeling of community at the expense of individual well-being. Let me put this in concrete terms. Imagine you're part of an Ubuntu society and you disagree with a decision the elders have made. Maybe it's about how resources are distributed. Maybe it's about who gets to pursue education. Maybe it's about a tradition you think is harmful. In a Western, individualistic society, you might speak up. You might organize others who agree with you. You might fight for change. In an Ubuntu society, that's seen as selfish, disruptive. You're prioritizing your individual thoughts over the collective wisdom. You're breaking the harmony. And in cultures where I am because we are is the foundation of existence, questioning the group isn't just disagreement. It's a threat to the very fabric of society. This creates what researchers call perceived restraint on personal freedom. People feel obligated to be loyal to the group without questioning authority or changes within the group. Questioning becomes disorderly behavior. Dissent becomes betrayal. And here's the thing that makes this especially dangerous. Ubuntu sounds so good that criticizing it feels wrong. It's like being against world peace or puppies. Who would argue against humanity towards others? Who would say, actually, maybe we shouldn't all be connected? But that's exactly why it needs to be examined, because beautiful sounding philosophies can be the most dangerous ones. The individual disappears. Let's talk about what happens to you as an individual in a true Ubuntu society. Your identity isn't self-determined. It's given to you by the community. You exist through others, which means if others reject you, what are you? If the community decides you don't belong, do you even have humanity anymore? Some philosophers have argued that Ubuntu creates a kind of philosophical trap. If your personhood comes from others, and others can judge whether you're being Ubuntu enough, then you're constantly at risk of losing your humanity. You're one wrong move away from being ostracized, and in an Ubuntu system, ostracism isn't just social rejection, it's the loss of your very self. This isn't theoretical. Look at what happened in South Africa during xenophobic attacks, despite Ubuntu being a core national value. Researchers actually questioned whether Ubuntu had lost its authenticity because people were attacking foreigners, other humans who should have been part of the universal human bond. But maybe that's not Ubuntu failing. Maybe that's Ubuntu working exactly as designed. Because Ubuntu doesn't actually say all humans are connected. It says you're connected to your community, your in-group, the people who recognize you as part of the whole. And what about outsiders? What about people who don't share your values? In many Ubuntu interpretations, they're not part of we, which means the beautiful phrase, "I am because we are," has an ugly shadow. I am because we are, and you are not we. There's also the problem of personal responsibility. If everything is collective, if all achievements belong to the group and all failures are shared, what happens to individual accountability? What happens when someone does something wrong, but the whole community is blamed? Or worse, what happens when someone needs to take a stand that the community disagrees with? Think about whistleblowers, activists, people who see injustice and speak out in an individualistic framework. These people are heroes standing up for what's right. In an Ubuntu framework, they're often seen as troublemakers, destroying the harmony of the group. The pressure to conform. Research on collectivist culture shows something fascinating and disturbing. They create intense pressure to conform. In individualistic societies, we value standing out, being unique, having your own opinions. But in collectivist societies built on principles like Ubuntu, conformity isn't just encouraged. It's how you prove your humanity. You show you're a good person by aligning with the group. You demonstrate your worth by putting the community first. And if you don't, you're not just different. You're wrong. You're failing at being human. This creates what researchers call emotional homogeneity. Everyone's supposed to feel the same things, value the same things, want the same things. Your emotions aren't really yours. They're supposed to match what the community expects. Imagine living in a society where even your feelings are supposed to be collective, where expressing the wrong emotion at the wrong time means you're disrupting harmony, where your inner life is constantly monitored by the group to make sure you're being sufficiently Ubuntu. And here's what makes this especially insidious. It's done in the name of love, in the name of connection, in the name of humanity itself. You can't fight it without seeming like a monster, because who would argue against caring for others? Who would say, actually, maybe I shouldn't have to sacrifice myself for the group. But that's the trap. Ubuntu creates a system where individual rights, individual boundaries, even individual thoughts become suspect. And it wraps this control in such beautiful language that questioning it feels immoral. Critics have pointed out that Ubuntu can lead to a lack of personal responsibility and autonomy. When community always comes first, when we always trumps I, individual accountability disappears. Nobody's truly responsible because everyone's responsible. And that means nobody's responsible. The modern problem. Here's where Ubuntu becomes especially problematic in our modern world. Ubuntu developed in traditional African societies where people lived in small, tight-knit communities. Everyone knew everyone. Resources were scarce and had to be shared to survive. The philosophy made sense in that context. But we don't live in that world anymore. We live in massive, diverse societies with millions of people from different backgrounds, different values, different goals. And Ubuntu doesn't scale well. Scholars have noted that Ubuntu is vague, doesn't acknowledge individual freedom adequately, and fits traditional small-scale culture more than modern industrial society. It's a philosophy designed for villages being applied to nations. In a small village, Ubuntu creates social cohesion. Everyone looks out for each other because they're genuinely connected. But in a modern city, in a globalized world, I am because we are starts to break down. Because who is we? Your neighborhood? Your ethnic group? Your nation? All of humanity? If it's all of humanity, then Ubuntu becomes so broad it means nothing. But if it's just your in-group, then Ubuntu becomes tribalism with a pretty name. There's also the question of power. Ubuntu assumes everyone in the community has equal voice, equal value. But that's not how real societies work. There are always hierarchies, always power dynamics. And when you combine the community decides your humanity with some people have more power in the community than others, you get a recipe for abuse. Those in power can use Ubuntu to silence dissent. They can say, "You're disrupting our harmony," when really they mean, "You're threatening my authority." They can weaponize collective identity against anyone who questions the status quo. And because Ubuntu is framed as this beautiful, moral philosophy, it's very hard to fight back against that abuse without looking like you're against community, against compassion, against humanity itself. So, is Ubuntu actually dangerous? The honest answer is, it depends. Ubuntu at its best can create incredible communities, places where people genuinely care for each other, where nobody's left behind, where collective action solves problems that individuals couldn't handle alone. There's real beauty in the idea that we're all connected, that your well-being affects mine, and mine affects yours. But Ubuntu at its worst, it can be suffocating. It can erase individuality, suppress dissent, enforce conformity, and create communities where stepping out of line means losing your very humanity. The danger isn't in the philosophy itself. The danger is in treating it as a perfect system, as the one true way to organize society. Because no philosophy is perfect. And philosophies that claim to be, philosophies that say, this is what it means to be truly human, those are the ones you need to watch out for. Maybe the real wisdom isn't in Ubuntu or in radical individualism. Maybe it's in understanding that both extremes have dangers, that we need some collective responsibility, some sense of connection, some community, but we also need individual rights, personal autonomy, the freedom to dissent. Because here's the thing, I am because we are is beautiful, but so is I am because I am. And maybe, just maybe, the healthiest societies are the ones that find a way to honor both. So the next time someone tells you about this beautiful African philosophy of Ubuntu, where everyone's connected and communities thrive through collective harmony, don't just nod along. Ask the hard questions. Ask what happens to individuals who don't fit. Ask where dissent goes in a society built on harmony. Ask who decides what the community wants. Because beautiful philosophies can have dark shadows, and it's only by looking at those shadows that we can figure out how to keep the light.